Napoleon's army lost over 400,000 soldiers during the horrific retreat from Moscow, yet he still managed to raise another grand army within months. Explore his relentless military career from the Toulon breakthrough and Austerlitz masterpiece to the fatal errors at Waterloo. Learn about his artillery revolution, economic warfare strategies, and how his legal reforms outlasted his empire, influencing nations long after his death on St. Helena. In the coastal city of Ajaccio on the island of Corsica, a child named Napoleon Bonaparte was born in the year 1769. This event would one day ripple across continents, but his beginnings were deceptively modest. He entered a world of recent and turbulent change, for Corsica had passed from Genoese rule to French control just 1 year before his birth. His father, Carlo Bonaparte, was a lawyer who navigated the new political landscape, securing a position that recognized his noble lineage. His mother, Letizia Remolino, was a figure of immense discipline and resilience, profoundly shaping her son's character with her austere values. The island itself was a cultural crossroad, its roots deeply Italian in language and custom. This complex heritage became a cornerstone of Napoleon's identity. Historians note that his original name, Napoleon Bonaparte, reflected this Italianate past. The family's minor nobility status and Corsica's recent annexation created a unique environment. Some analysis suggest this fostered in the young Napoleon a sense of being an outsider, which later fueled his ambition. He was not born a Frenchman but became one by circumstance, a fact that would forever color his relationship with the nation he would eventually command. His journey from a Corsican childhood to the throne of an empire remains one of history's most compelling transformations. Yet this outsider would soon find himself navigating the very heart of the establishment he sought to master. Napoleon Bonaparte began his formal education in France at the age of 9. He first attended the college in Autun to improve his French language skills. Shortly after, he received a scholarship to the Royal Military School in Brienne. This scholarship was granted by the king, covering his tuition and expenses. Life at Brienne proved challenging for the young Corsican. He faced difficulties adapting to the culture and was sometimes mocked for his accent. These experiences fostered a resilient and ambitious character. His academic performance revealed clear strengths in specific subjects. Napoleon excelled in mathematics, a skill crucial for his future artillery career. He also demonstrated a profound interest in history, devouring books on ancient civilizations and military campaigns. Research has shown his private readings extended to Enlightenment thinkers like Rousseau. Their ideas on social contracts and state power likely influenced his later political vision. In 1784, he earned a place at the prestigious École Militaire in Paris. His training there intensified his early military interests, particularly in artillery science. He completed the 2-year program in just 1 year, graduating as a second lieutenant. Analysis has revealed that his education, marked by scholarship and intellectual curiosity, provided the foundational knowledge for his rapid ascent through the military ranks. This period forged the officer who would one day become emperor. This foundational training would soon be tested as he received his first military commission. Napoleon Bonaparte completed his studies at the École Militaire in Paris in 1785. He graduated with a commission as a second lieutenant in the artillery, a branch of the military requiring precise mathematical and technical knowledge. His first assignment sent him to the Lafari Regiment, an esteemed artillery unit stationed in Valence. This posting provided his initial practical experience with cannons and military logistics. During these early years, the young officer dedicated considerable time to intense self-education. He read voraciously, consuming works on history, geography, and political theory. This period also saw him forge his first important professional relationships within the army. While building his career on the French mainland, Napoleon never lost interest in his native Corsica. He maintained correspondence and followed political developments on the island closely, even taking extended leave to involve himself in local affairs. This dual focus on his military duties and Corsican politics characterized his formative years as a junior officer. This dual focus would soon be tested when revolutionary fervor began sweeping across France, forcing Napoleon to choose between his Corsican loyalties and his French ambitions. By the spring of 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte had assembled the largest military force Europe had ever witnessed. This colossal host, known as the Grand Army, numbered over 600,000 men. Its composition was truly multinational, drawing soldiers from across the French Empire and its allied states. Alongside French regiments marched Polish lancers, Italian infantry, and German cavalry from the Confederation of the Rhine. This diversity demonstrated Napoleon's political reach, but also introduced complex command and loyalty challenges. The logistical undertaking was staggering. Supplying such a massive invasion force required unprecedented planning. Historians note that supply trains stretched for miles, carrying food, ammunition, and equipment for the march into Russia. Feeding hundreds of thousands of men and their horses across vast, underdeveloped territories became a primary concern from the outset. Analysis has revealed that the army's sheer size ultimately worked against its mobility and sustainability. Napoleon's confidence, however, was immense. This supreme self-assurance was rooted in his long string of decisive victories across Europe. He had crushed the armies of Austria, Prussia, and others in brilliant, rapid campaigns. One contemporary wrote, "He seemed to believe the Russian venture was but another grand maneuver." This optimism led him to underestimate the vastness of Russia and the strategic depth it offered to a defending army. Yet this supreme confidence would soon face a test unlike any other, as the vast Russian landscape held surprises no European campaign could have prepared them for. On June 24, 1812, Napoleon's Grande Armée began its fateful invasion, crossing the Niemen River into the Russian Empire. This massive force, exceeding 400,000 men, expected a swift, decisive confrontation. However, they encountered only empty land and retreating shadows. The Russian strategy, masterminded by Barclay de Tolly, was one of calculated withdrawal, denying Napoleon the major battle he so desperately sought. This retreat was coupled with a devastating scorched earth policy. As the Russians fell back, they systematically burned crops, villages, and supplies. The advancing French columns marched through a smoldering landscape under a relentless summer sun. Provisions grew scarce, and the oppressive heat took a severe toll on men and horses alike. Napoleon's frustration mounted with each passing day. He pushed his army deeper into the vastness of Russia, but the main Russian armies remained elusive, refusing to stand and fight. Historical analysis reveals this period was a critical psychological blow. The emperor, accustomed to dictating the terms of engagement, found himself in a war of attrition he could not control. His letters from the time show a growing impatience, as the very land itself seemed to conspire against his grand design. The march toward Moscow became a grueling test of endurance, with the real enemy proving to be distance and deprivation, long before any major battle was even fought. Yet this slow erosion of strength would soon be eclipsed by a single day of unimaginable, concentrated violence. The Battle of Borodino, fought on September 7, 1812, represented the single bloodiest day of the Napoleonic Wars. The Russian army, commanded by Mikhail Kutuzov, had constructed formidable earthworks across the battlefield. The French Grand Army launched a series of massive frontal assaults against these fortified positions. The fighting centered on key points like the Rayevsky Redoubt and the Bagration Flaches. The morning opened with a colossal artillery duel involving over 1,200 cannons. This thunderous barrage was followed by relentless infantry charges. Soldiers advanced into devastating crossfires, with the fighting for the Flaches changing hands multiple times. The sheer scale of the carnage was unprecedented. By day's end, combined casualties exceeded 70,000 men, a staggering figure for a single day of combat. A pivotal and controversial moment occurred in the afternoon. Napoleon faced a critical decision. His Imperial Guard, a fresh and elite force of over 20,000 men, remained uncommitted. Many of his marshals pleaded for this final blow to shatter the Russian line. However, Napoleon refused. He reportedly stated, "I will not have my guard destroyed 800 leagues from Paris." This choice likely prevented a decisive French victory, allowing the Russian army to withdraw in order, setting the stage for the disastrous French retreat from Moscow. This refusal to commit his elite forces at Borodino would soon have devastating consequences, as Napoleon's preserved but weakened army marched onward toward an empty prize. In September 1812, Napoleon's Grand Army entered Moscow, finding a near-deserted city. The Russian army and most inhabitants had withdrawn, implementing a scorched earth strategy. This eerie silence foreshadowed the imminent catastrophe. Within days, massive fires erupted, engulfing the wooden structures. The city's governor, Count Rostopchin, is widely believed to have ordered its destruction to deny the French supplies and shelter. The inferno raged for nearly a week, obliterating approximately 3/4 of Moscow and leaving Napoleon's forces exposed. From the Kremlin, a frustrated Napoleon made multiple attempts to negotiate peace with Tsar Alexander I. He dispatched several letters, proposing an end to the conflict. Historical analysis reveals these overtures were a strategic gamble. The Tsar, however, remained resolute, refusing all communication. His advisors urged steadfast resistance, confident that time and the Russian winter were their greatest allies. Napoleon's hope-triumphant political settlement evaporated completely. As October progressed, the strategic situation became untenable. With supplies dwindling and no surrender from the Tsar, the decision to retreat was finalized. The French army, having waited in vain for over a month, began its withdrawal on October 19th. This move initiated one of history's most disastrous military retreats. Harsh winter conditions and relentless Russian attacks would decimate the once grand army, turning the occupation of Moscow from a tactical victory into a catastrophic defeat. But the true scale of this disaster would only become apparent as the retreat unfolded across hundreds of miles of frozen terrain. The retreat from Russia became a harrowing descent into chaos. As temperatures plummeted in late November 1812, the Grand Army disintegrated. Soldiers, clad in summer rags, succumbed to frostbite by the thousands. Research has shown that starvation forced men to eat horseflesh and even resort to cannibalism. Discipline collapsed completely, with soldiers abandoning their weapons and plunder. Constant harassment by Cossack cavalry and peasant partisans made every mile a nightmare. These swift, brutal attacks targeted stragglers and supply wagons, preventing any rest. One officer wrote, "We were hunted like wild beasts across the snow." The Russian strategy of scorched earth left no shelter or food, turning the retreat into a frozen death march. The catastrophe culminated at the Berezina River in late November. Russian forces bombarded the French engineers as they desperately built 2 pontoon bridges. A chaotic crush of soldiers and civilians surged across under heavy fire. Many studies estimate that tens of thousands perished in the freezing waters or on the river banks, trapped between the Russian artillery and the collapsing bridges. This final disaster sealed the fate of Napoleon's invasion, transforming a mighty army into a shattered, fleeing mob. Yet from this utter devastation, a ghostly remnant would somehow find its way home. The remnants of Napoleon's Grande Armée, a spectral force of fewer than 40,000 men, staggered back across the Niemen River in December 1812. This shattered host represented a catastrophic loss from an invasion force that had once numbered over 600,000. The political shockwaves were immediate and profound across Europe. Nations long subdued saw an unprecedented opportunity. In Prussia, General Yorck's Convention of Toroggen in December marked a decisive break, turning a forced ally into a resurgent enemy. This collapse of French military prestige directly catalyzed the formation of the Sixth Coalition. By the spring of 1813, Russia, Prussia, Great Britain, and Sweden had united with a singular objective: to exploit France's profound weakness and push Napoleon back within his natural borders. The coalition's strategy was built upon the newly revealed vulnerability of the French emperor. The myth of his invincibility, carefully cultivated through years of brilliant victories, evaporated in the Russian snows. As one contemporary diplomat noted, "The giant has been shown to have feet of clay." European courts now believed he could be defeated on the battlefield, a conviction that had been entirely absent before the Russian disaster. This shift in perception was as strategically significant as the loss of the army itself, setting the stage for the decisive confrontations at Leipzig and, ultimately, Waterloo. This shattered perception of invincibility consequently forced Napoleon into a desperate race against time to rebuild his military strength before his emboldened enemies could unite against him. Following the catastrophic Russian campaign of 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte faced the monumental task of rebuilding his grand army from near ruin. He conscripted hundreds of thousands of fresh, albeit inexperienced, recruits to replace the veterans lost in the snow. However, the balance of power in Europe was shifting irrevocably. Prussia, once a forced ally, saw an opportunity and defected to the Russian cause in early 1813. This pivotal betrayal triggered a wider rebellion among the German states, with Saxony and other former Confederation of the Rhine members turning against French domination. The conflict culminated in the Battle of Leipzig, often called the Battle of the Nations, fought over 4 days in October 1813. It was the largest battle in European history prior to the 20th century, pitting Napoleon's forces against a coalition of Austrian, Prussian, Russian, and Swedish armies. Analysis of the battle reveals that French forces were significantly outnumbered and strategically outmaneuvered. The decisive defeat forced a full French retreat west of the Rhine. The collapse was immediate and total. French control over the vast German territories dissolved within weeks. The Confederation of the Rhine was formally dissolved, and its member states transferred their allegiance to the coalition. This campaign marked the definitive end of Napoleon's hegemony in Central Europe, shattering the myth of his invincibility and opening the path for the eventual invasion of France itself. Yet this decisive victory would soon force the Allies to confront a new and unexpected challenge. In early 1814, the Allied armies crossed into France from multiple directions. Napoleon, with vastly outnumbered forces, launched a desperate defensive campaign. His strategy was a masterpiece of rapid movement and offensive strikes. He won several minor engagements against separate enemy corps. However, these tactical victories could not alter the overwhelming strategic reality. The sheer numerical superiority of the coalition made each French success temporary and costly. By late March, the main Allied force marched directly on Paris, largely bypassing Napoleon's army. The French capital, defended by Marshals Marmont and Mortier, surrendered on March 30, 1814. This decisive event broke the will of Napoleon's senior commanders. A delegation of his marshals, led by Ney, confronted the emperor at the palace of Fontainebleau. They firmly refused to continue a war they saw as lost, forcing his hand. Facing inevitable defeat and the collapse of his support, Napoleon had no choice. On April 6, 1814, he signed the Act of Abdication, renouncing the thrones of France and Italy. The Allies then granted him sovereignty over the small island of Elba, where he was exiled. As one historian noted, the fall was as dramatic as the rise, marking the end of an era and his first but not final exit from the world stage. Yet this island exile would prove surprisingly brief, setting the stage for one last dramatic gambit. In February 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte executed a daring escape from his Elba exile. With only 1,000 men, he landed near Cannes, beginning an improbable march north. His advance triggered extraordinary scenes. Veterans wept at his appearance, while peasants and workers flocked to his standard. The army's loyalty never wavered. Entire regiments sent to arrest him instead joined his cause. Their enthusiasm was palpable, a testament to his enduring charisma. The Bourbon monarchy's collapse was stunningly rapid. King Louis XVIII fled Paris as Napoleon approached without firing a single shot. Garrison after garrison defected and local officials hastily switched allegiance. The regime, propped by foreign powers, possessed no popular roots. Its disintegration revealed a France still deeply divided, where revolutionary ideals and imperial glory held powerful sway over the masses. Alarmed European powers acted swiftly. By March 25th, they declared Napoleon an outlaw and formed the Seventh Coalition. Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria pledged hundreds of thousands of troops to crush his restored rule. This unified opposition set the stage for a final, decisive confrontation. Historians note this coalition represented a fundamental shift, a collective resolve to end the French Revolutionary era permanently, leading directly toward the fields of Waterloo. Yet even as this formidable coalition mobilized, Napoleon would seize one final opportunity to divide his enemies before their full might could be brought to bear. On June 16, 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte secured a hard-fought victory over the Prussian army led by Gebhard von Blücher at Ligny. The French forces delivered a powerful blow, yet they failed to achieve a decisive, war-ending rout. In the battle's immediate aftermath, Napoleon made a critical decision. He dispatched Marshal Grouchy with 30,000 men to pursue the retreating Prussians, intending to prevent their reorganization and potential union with other Allied forces. This move, however, would soon be scrutinized by historians. Simultaneously, a separate French corps under Marshal Ney was engaged at the strategic crossroads of Quatre Bras. There, they contested the Anglo-Allied army commanded by the Duke of Wellington. This concurrent battle resulted in a stalemate, tying down crucial French units that could have been deployed elsewhere. The two-front engagement stretched Napoleon's command and resources thin at a pivotal moment. The following hours were plagued by miscommunication and delays. Marshal Grouchy's pursuit was methodical but slow, allowing the Prussians to retreat not eastward, but northward toward Wavre. This maintained their communication with Wellington's army. Meanwhile, ambiguous orders and a lack of coordinated action between Ney and Napoleon created a fatal operational pause. Analysis has revealed that this series of command failures and timing errors critically hampered French momentum, setting the stage for the impending confrontation at Waterloo just 2 days later. Yet these command failures would soon be tested on a single, rain-soaked battlefield where every decision would carry immediate consequences. The morning of June 18, 1815, dawned with heavy rain, a downpour that delayed the start of the Battle of Waterloo for several hours. This delay proved a critical advantage for the Duke of Wellington's Allied army. The wet ground slowed movement and made the French artillery less effective, while Wellington's infantry held a strong defensive ridge. Napoleon Bonaparte launched a series of massive assaults against the Allied positions. The French infantry advanced in dense columns, aiming to break the center of Wellington's line. Fierce cavalry charges followed, but the Allied squares held firm against the onslaught. The fighting for the fortified farmhouses of Hougoumont and La Haye-Sainte was particularly brutal, consuming vast numbers of troops. For hours, the outcome hung in a bloody balance, with neither side able to secure a decisive advantage. As the afternoon wore on, the battle reached its climax. The French Imperial Guard, Napoleon's elite reserve, was committed in a final, desperate push. Just as this formidable force advanced, the vanguard of Gebhard von Blücher's Prussian army began to arrive on the French flank. This crucial intervention shattered French morale. Attacked from two sides, the French army's cohesion broke. The Prussians pressed their attack relentlessly, turning a hard-fought contest into a decisive rout and sealing Napoleon's final defeat. With his military ambitions crushed at Waterloo, Napoleon now faced the political consequences of this catastrophic defeat. Napoleon returned to Paris on June 22, 1815, his political support evaporating after the decisive defeat at Waterloo. Facing an impossible situation, he signed his second and final abdication just 4 days later. This act ended the period known as the 100 Days and his rule over France for good. He initially hoped for asylum in the United States, but the British naval blockade made this escape impossible. On July 15, 1815, Napoleon formally surrendered to Captain Frederick Maitland of the Royal Navy aboard Esmes Bellerophon. He was treated with respect but was effectively a prisoner. The European powers, particularly Britain, now faced a critical decision regarding his fate. Sending him back to Europe risked further instability, while keeping him in Britain was politically untenable. After much deliberation, the British government decided on permanent exile to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. He arrived at his final prison in October 1815. Napoleon lived under constant guard at Longwood House, a residence described by contemporaries as damp and windswept. His movements were restricted to a limited area, and all his correspondence was heavily monitored by the island's governor, Sir Hudson Lowe. This strict supervision and the island's extreme isolation were designed to prevent any chance of a return. It was here, under these confined conditions, that the former emperor spent his final years, dictating his memoirs until his death in May 1821. While these confined conditions defined his final years, they could not contain the questions that would arise immediately following his passing. Napoleon Bonaparte died on May 5, 1821, ending 6 years of exile on the remote island of St. Helena. His final years were marked by declining health, and the official cause of death was recorded as stomach cancer. This diagnosis was supported by his family's medical history and his own reported symptoms. However, the circumstances surrounding his death quickly became a subject of intense debate. An autopsy was performed the following day. While the doctors noted a severe stomach ulcer consistent with cancer, the findings did not fully convince everyone. This uncertainty gave rise to persistent rumors of poisoning. Some researchers pointed to traces of arsenic found in later analysis of his hair, suggesting deliberate murder. Others maintained that the evidence still strongly supports terminal gastric cancer, a condition his father also died from. His funeral was a solemn affair held on May 9th. He was initially buried in a shaded valley on St. Helena, in a tomb surrounded by willow trees. The mysterious nature of his illness and the political tensions of the era ensured that the poisoning theory would endure for decades. The controversy was only partially settled when his body was exhumed and returned to France in 1840. Yet the question of what truly ended the emperor's life continues to intrigue historians. Yet beyond the enduring medical mysteries surrounding his final days, Napoleon's true legacy lies in the sweeping institutional changes he implemented that would outlive him by centuries. Napoleon Bonaparte fundamentally reshaped France's political and legal landscape through enduring reforms. His most celebrated achievement was the Civil Code of 1804, commonly known as the Napoleonic Code. This legal framework replaced a complex patchwork of feudal laws with a clear, systematic set of civil laws. It guaranteed property rights, established civil equality for men, and enshrined religious toleration. The code's logical structure and emphasis on clarity facilitated its adoption across Europe, Latin America, and beyond, influencing civil law systems for 2 centuries. Administratively, Napoleon constructed a highly centralized state. He replaced elected assemblies with a powerful executive branch and appointed prefects to govern each department, ensuring directives from Paris were implemented uniformly. This system dismantled regional particularism and created a modern, efficient bureaucracy. It established a template for centralized governance that many modern nations would later emulate, creating a professional administrative class loyal to the state. His educational reforms were equally transformative. In 1802, he established the Lycée system, a network of secondary schools designed to create a new elite of loyal and capable citizens. These state-run institutions provided a standardized curriculum focused on sciences, humanities, and military discipline. This system laid the foundation for France's modern public education, prioritizing merit and creating a pipeline for future civil servants and military officers, thereby consolidating his vision of a rational, orderly society. This educational foundation would soon supply the military with precisely the kind of disciplined and meritocratic officers needed to execute his revolutionary approach to warfare. Napoleon Bonaparte fundamentally reshaped modern warfare through revolutionary military concepts. He perfected the corps system, allowing large armies to march separately but fight united. His emphasis on decisive battles and rapid maneuver became hallmarks of Napoleonic warfare. Artillery integration reached unprecedented levels under his command. Military scholars later identified these innovations as foundational to 19th-century combat doctrines. Throughout the 1800s, generals worldwide studied Napoleon's campaigns as essential textbooks. At military academies from West Point to St. Cyr, his Italian and Austrian campaigns became required reading. Karl von Clausewitz analyzed his methods in the seminal work, On War. Napoleon's own maxims, published posthumously, served as direct instruction for future commanders. His battlefield strategies influenced conflicts from the American Civil War to the Franco-Prussian War. A powerful mythology simultaneously grew around Napoleon's life, blending fact with romantic legend. Paintings depicted him crossing the Alps in dramatic fashion, while poems celebrated his supposed grandeur. He actively cultivated this image through state-controlled newspapers and official bulletins. As he wrote from exile, "I closed the gaping abyss of anarchy," consciously shaping his historical narrative. This created two distinct figures, the historical general and the legendary hero that continues to captivate generations. Yet this carefully constructed legend would soon face the scrutiny of changing perspectives, as historians began to reinterpret his complex legacy through very different lenses. Historical interpretations of Napoleon Bonaparte have undergone remarkable transformations across 2 centuries. 19th-century Romantic writers often portrayed him as a tragic hero, a genius destined for greatness but ultimately defeated by fate. Simultaneously, liberal thinkers of the 1800s acknowledged his role in spreading revolutionary ideals across Europe, even as they criticized his autocratic methods. The 20th century, particularly after 2 world wars, fostered a more critical perspective. Historians began to analyze his rule through the lens of totalitarianism, focusing on the immense human cost of his continuous military campaigns. Recent research continues to refine our understanding. Archival studies have revealed the complex administrative machinery behind his empire, showing how his personal ambition was supported by a vast bureaucracy. Analysis of economic data has highlighted both the stability his reforms brought to France and the financial strain his wars imposed on conquered territories. Scholars now often present a dual portrait. One perspective emphasizes his foundational role in modern statecraft and legal systems. Another perspective meticulously documents the millions of lives lost and the political repression that characterized his reign. This evolving scholarship demonstrates that no single narrative can fully capture such a complex figure. Each generation re-examines his legacy through its own values and concerns, ensuring that the debate over his impact remains as dynamic as the man himself. The historical conversation continues, balanced between his undeniable achievements and the profound costs of his imperial ambitions. When the French Revolution erupted in 1789, Napoleon Bonaparte was a young artillery officer stationed in mainland France. Historical analysis reveals his initial reaction combined professional ambition with personal conflict. He saw the revolution as a monumental opportunity for meritocratic advancement, a system where talent could trump noble birth. Yet his heart remained tied to Corsica, the island of his birth where nationalist aspirations for independence from France were also intensifying. This created a profound internal struggle between his adopted French Republican ideals and his deep-seated Corsican patriotism. He secured an extended leave and returned to Corsica for several months, beginning in late 1789. On the island, he immersed himself in local politics, attempting to position himself as a leader. He helped organize a volunteer National Guard battalion, aligning himself with the revolutionary cause on Corsican soil. His activities were a deliberate effort to bridge his French military identity with Corsican civic life, a complex balancing act documented in his personal correspondence from the period. However, Napoleon's ambitions soon clashed with those of the established Corsican leader, Pasquale Poli. Poli, a hero of the Corsican independence movement, initially represented an ideal for the young officer, yet research indicates Napoleon grew increasingly disillusioned. He perceived Poli's vision for Corsica as insular and backward-looking, especially when it conflicted with the expansive, modernizing ideals of the French Revolution. This growing rift with the iconic leader marked a critical turning point, pushing Napoleon's loyalties decisively toward France and setting the stage for his eventual departure and meteoric rise. This ideological shift from Corsican patriot to French revolutionary would soon find its ultimate test on a distant battlefield. The Siege of Toulon in 1793 became Napoleon Bonaparte's defining breakthrough. Republican forces struggled to dislodge a powerful coalition of royalists and British troops. As a young artillery captain, Napoleon recognized the tactical importance of a key fort, La Guillotte. He argued that capturing this position would allow the French to bombard the Allied fleet in the harbor, cutting the city's lifeline. His commanding officer, wounded in action, created a vacuum of leadership that Napoleon decisively filled. He meticulously devised an artillery plan to assault the fort. Research has shown his strategy concentrated cannon fire with unprecedented precision. The subsequent capture of La Guillotte unfolded exactly as he predicted. French guns then rained fire upon the enemy ships, forcing a complete evacuation. The city fell to the Republicans shortly after. This stunning victory did not go unnoticed. The Committee of Public Safety rewarded the 24-year-old officer with a promotion to brigadier general, a meteoric rise. However, his newfound prominence carried risk. Following the fall of Robespierre during the Thermidorian reaction in 1794, Napoleon faced temporary imprisonment due to his association with the Austerlitz regime. This setback proved brief. His proven genius at Toulon had already forged an unbreakable link between his destiny and the future of France, launching him onto the path to ultimate power. While his destiny was now tied to France's future, the immediate path forward would require navigating the treacherous political landscape of the capital. Following his success at Toulon, Napoleon Bonaparte received a new assignment in Paris with the Army of the Interior. This position placed him at the heart of the nation's political turbulence. His moment arrived on the 13th of Vendémiaire, year 4, when a royalist insurrection threatened the governing National Convention. The government tasked Napoleon with its defense. He famously deployed artillery, positioning cannons to fire grape shot along the streets near the Church of Saint Roch. This decisive action swiftly crushed the uprising, cementing his reputation as a man who could deliver results under extreme pressure. This military triumph directly elevated his social standing. Soon after, he met Joséphine de Beauharnais, a prominent and well-connected socialite. Their courtship was swift, and they married in a civil ceremony in March 1796. Historians note that Napoleon was deeply enamored, while some analyses suggest Joséphine also saw the strategic advantage in aligning with a rising military star. This union integrated him into Parisian high society, providing access to influential salons and powerful figures. He actively cultivated a growing network of political allies, including key members of the Directory like Paul Barras. These connections, combined with his proven military prowess and advantageous marriage, transformed the young artillery officer into a formidable political force within the capital. This period in Paris was a crucial stepping stone, setting the stage for his future ascent to ultimate power. But how would this ambitious young general convert his political influence into a decisive military command? In March 1796, the French Directory made a fateful decision. They appointed the 26-year-old Napoleon Bonaparte to command the army of Italy. This was a deeply calculated risk. The politically fragile Directory needed military victories to secure its power, yet it also feared popular generals. Sending the ambitious young officer to a secondary front seemed an ideal solution. It offered potential glory with minimal political threat to the government in Paris. The army Napoleon inherited was in a state of profound neglect. Historical records describe a force of fewer than 40,000 men, many lacking proper shoes and uniforms. Morale was catastrophically low, with soldiers on the verge of mutiny over unpaid wages and scarce supplies. One contemporary observer wrote, "The army was starving." Napoleon faced the immediate task of transforming this desperate collection of men into an effective fighting force. His strategic genius became immediately apparent. Rather than engaging the superior Austrian and Piedmontese armies in a direct confrontation, he executed a swift and audacious plan. He concentrated his limited forces to achieve local superiority, driving a wedge between the two allied powers. This maneuver forced the Kingdom of Piedmont-Sardinia to seek a rapid armistice, effectively removing one enemy from the war within just 2 weeks and isolating the Austrians for the campaigns that would follow. But how quickly would this new strategy of lightning warfare deliver its first decisive victories? The Lightning Campaign began in April 1796 with 3 rapid-fire victories. At Montenotte on April 12th, Napoleon Bonaparte shattered an Austrian advance guard. His forces then pivoted west to Millesimo, where they overwhelmed a Piedmontese corps in a fierce 2-day battle. The final blow fell at Dago, where French troops seized a strategic position after intense combat. These 3 engagements, fought over just 5 days, demonstrated a stunning new tempo of warfare. Historians note Napoleon's success stemmed from revolutionary tactics. He concentrated his limited artillery for maximum impact at decisive points, a departure from traditional dispersion. His divisions moved with unprecedented speed, allowing them to strike isolated enemy units before they could unite. This operational art of divide and conquer was masterfully executed. He drove a wedge between the Austrian and Piedmontese armies, preventing their coordination and defeating each in detail. The strategic consequence was immediate and severe for the alliance. Piedmont-Sardinia, its army broken and territory exposed, had no choice but to sue for peace. The resulting armistice of Cherasco, signed on April 28th, forced them to withdraw from the war. This single diplomatic move neutralized one of France's primary opponents, leaving Austria to face Napoleon's ascendant army alone. The path into northern Italy now lay open, a direct result of these lightning victories. With northern Italy now accessible, the focus shifts from diplomatic triumphs to a single strategic crossing that would test the resolve of this ascendant army. The bridge at Lodi became the Austrian cannons commanded the narrow crossing, turning the Adda River into a death trap. Napoleon, witnessing the hesitation of his troops, seized a flag and moved toward the bridge in a stunning display of personal courage. His grenadiers, electrified by his example, surged forward in a furious bayonet charge against the intense artillery and musket fire. The French forces secured the bridgehead in a brutal, close-quarters struggle. This victory transcended a mere tactical success. Research has shown that Napoleon's direct involvement at Lodi cemented an unbreakable bond with his soldiers. They began calling him Le Petit Caporal, a term of profound affection and respect. An emerging leadership cult was born from the smoke of the battle, transforming the commander into a legendary figure whose personal bravery was now unquestioned. His troops' loyalty shifted from the abstract idea of the Republic to the tangible person of Napoleon. The battle's impact resonated deeply with Napoleon himself. He later reflected on this pivotal event, writing in his memoirs that it was at Lodi he first saw the world flee before me and conceived his grand ambition. Analysis has revealed that this moment crystallized his belief in a destiny far beyond that of a mere general, setting him irrevocably on the path toward imperial power. This newfound sense of destiny would soon find its expression not just in military command, but in the deliberate shaping of nations. Following his Italian victories, Napoleon began constructing a new political order. In northern Italy, he transformed conquered territories into sister republics, including the Cisalpine and Ligurian republics. These states were nominally independent but served as French client states, extending his influence far beyond the battlefield. This political restructuring demonstrated his vision for a Europe reorganized under French principles. His diplomatic prowess culminated in the Treaty of Campo Formio in 1797. This agreement, negotiated largely on his own terms, ended the War of the First Coalition. The treaty dramatically redrew the map of Europe, with France gaining the Austrian Netherlands and key territories. This act solidified his reputation not just as a general, but as a formidable statesman. Concurrent, Napoleon was asserting his growing independence from the French government in Paris. He made critical decisions regarding Italy without seeking prior approval from the Directory. Analysis has shown he skillfully managed his public image to bolster this autonomy. He founded several newspapers, such as the Corriere dell'Armée d'Italie, to directly shape French public opinion about his campaigns. These publications presented his actions in a heroic light, ensuring his triumphs resonated powerfully with the citizenry back home, effectively making him the primary source of news from the front. This mastery over public perception would soon empower him to undertake his most ambitious military campaign yet. Napoleon Bonaparte envisioned a daring strategic gambit in 1798. His proposed invasion of Egypt was not merely a territorial conquest. It was a calculated thrust aimed at severing Britain's lucrative trade routes and threatening its crown jewel, India. By establishing a French stronghold in the east, he hoped to cripple British economic power. This move was designed to force London to divert its formidable navy, thereby relieving pressure on France in Europe. The military expedition was shadowed by an unprecedented scientific and cultural mission. Over 160 scholars, artists, and engineers accompanied the forces. Their mandate was to document and study every facet of ancient and modern Egypt. This civilian corps transformed the invasion into a grand intellectual endeavor, seeking knowledge alongside conquest. Their work would later culminate in the monumental Description de l'Egypte. The campaign commenced with a swift and decisive capture of the island of Malta in June 1798. The French fleet then sailed across the Mediterranean, achieving a successful landing near Alexandria in early July. The inclusion of so many intellectuals in a military force was a remarkable and unusual feature. As one scholar wrote, they were a traveling library and a colony of thinkers. This fusion of military might and scholarly pursuit made the Egyptian expedition a unique chapter in the annals of history, blending the clash of empires with the quiet pursuit of enlightenment. Yet this remarkable fusion of intellectual and military pursuits would soon face its ultimate test, as the quiet pursuit of enlightenment gave way to the stark realities of combat. The Battle of the Pyramids in July 1798 was a brutal demonstration of tactical innovation. Napoleon Bonaparte faced the formidable Mamluk cavalry, warriors renowned for their skill and ferocity. To counter their charges, he arranged his infantry into massive hollow squares, with artillery at the corners and baggage in the center. This formation created an unbreakable wall of bayonets and musket fire. The Mamluks repeated, desperate assaults shattered against these disciplined formations, leading to a decisive French victory that secured Lower Egypt. However, this triumph was immediately overshadowed by a catastrophic naval defeat. Just days after the land battle, the French fleet lay at anchor in Aboukir Bay. Admiral Horatio Nelson's British squadron executed a daring attack, sailing between the French line and the shore. The ensuing battle was a masterclass in naval gunnery and aggression. One by one, French ships of the line were pounded into wrecks or captured. The flagship Vauriant exploded in a fireball visible for miles, a symbolic death knell for French naval power in the region. The near-total destruction of the fleet had immediate and dire strategic consequences. Napoleon's army of around 35,000 men was now completely cut off from France. This severance of their supply and communication lines transformed the Egyptian campaign from a grand strategic gambit into a desperate struggle for survival. The army was isolated, stranded in a hostile land, its fate hinging entirely on its own diminishing resources and the general's next move. Yet even in this desperate isolation, Napoleon recognized that preserving knowledge could become their most enduring weapon. Despite immense military pressures, Napoleon ensured French scholars continued their work across Egypt. Their efforts produced the monumental Description de l'Egypte, a multi-volume record of the region's geography, natural history, and ancient monuments. The most pivotal discovery occurred in July 1799 near the port of Rashid, known to Europeans as Rosetta. Soldiers fortifying a fort found a dark stone slab inscribed with 3 scripts. Scholars immediately recognized its potential. This Rosetta Stone, as it became known, contained identical passages in Greek, Demotic, and Egyptian hieroglyphs. It provided the long-sought key to deciphering ancient Egypt's written language, a breakthrough that would unlock millennia of history. While scholars made progress, Napoleon's military campaign faced a critical test in Syria. In early 1799, he marched north to confront Ottoman forces, aiming to preempt an invasion of Egypt. His army achieved several victories, but the well-defended city of Acre proved an insurmountable obstacle. A combined Ottoman and British force, supported by the navy, resisted repeated assaults. After a grueling 2-month siege and heavy losses from both combat and plague, Napoleon was forced to order a difficult retreat back to Egypt in May. The situation grew increasingly dire. News reached Napoleon of political instability and military defeats in France, threatening his power base. Isolated in Egypt with his army weakened, he made a fateful decision. In August 1799, he secretly abandoned his command. Leaving his army under General Kléber, Napoleon and a small group of officers evaded the British naval blockade on 2 frigates. His dramatic return to France was a calculated gamble to reclaim his political destiny, leaving the Egyptian expedition to its eventual fate. Yet this dramatic personal gamble stood in stark contrast to the profound national crisis he would find upon his return. Napoleon Bonaparte returned to France in 1799 to find a nation in profound political disarray. The Directory, the 5-member committee then governing the country, was widely seen as corrupt and ineffective. France was grappling with financial instability and military setbacks, creating a climate ripe for a political transformation. Many influential figures believed only a strong executive power could restore order and stability to the Republic. Recognizing this opportunity, Napoleon swiftly formed a crucial alliance with Emmanuel Joseph Sayers, one of the directors himself. Sayers, a master of political theory, was actively plotting to overthrow the very government he served. He needed a popular military hero to lend credibility and force to the conspiracy. Together, they assembled a coalition of conspirators including Napoleon's brother, Lucien Bonaparte, who was the president of the Council of 500. Lucien's political position was instrumental in managing the legislative side of the impending coup. The conspirators meticulously planned their move for the 18th of Brumaire, year 8 in the French Republican calendar, which corresponded to November 9th, 1799. The plan involved persuading the 2 legislative councils to relocate to the Chair de Saint Cloud under the pretext of a fictional Jacobin plot. Napoleon was tasked with securing the military operation. His loyal general, Joachim Murat, was positioned to command the troops that would provide the necessary intimidation. On the appointed day, the scheme initially faltered when Napoleon faced hostile lawmakers. However, Lucien skillfully intervened outside the chamber, rallying the soldiers by allegedly drawing his sword and pointing it at his brother's chest to decry the resistance. This dramatic act, followed by Murat's order for his grenadiers to clear the hall, ultimately secured the coup's success, effectively dissolving the Directory and paving the way for the consulate. This decisive military action consequently set the stage for Napoleon's direct and volatile encounter with the hostile council. The Council of 500 erupted into chaos on the 19th of Brumaire, year 8. As Napoleon Bonaparte entered the chamber, hostile deputies surrounded him, shouting accusations of treason and betrayal. His attempts to speak were drowned out by the furious assembly. Some historians note he was physically jostled and nearly fainted, a moment of profound vulnerability for the general. His brother, Lucien Bonaparte, then president of the council, intervened decisively. He dramatically seized a sword and pointed it at Napoleon, vowing to stab his own brother if he ever betrayed the principles of liberty. This theatrical gesture was a calculated move to regain control of the narrative. Lucien then appealed to the soldiers waiting outside, declaring the deputies were being manipulated by foreign agents. General Joachim Murat and his grenadiers received the order. They marched into the hall with fixed bayonets, clearing the chamber of the defiant representatives within minutes. The physical expulsion of the legislative body marked the violent culmination of the coup. With the opposition silenced, the path was clear to establish a new government. The constitution of the year 8 was swiftly adopted, creating a 3-member consulate. Napoleon Bonaparte was installed as the first consul, holding executive power for a term of 10 years. This event on the 10th of November, 1799, effectively ended the French Revolution and centralized authority, launching Napoleon on his path to becoming emperor. But how would Napoleon transform this newfound power into lasting control following his seizure of power? Napoleon Bonaparte moved swiftly to consolidate his authority through foundational legal changes. The Constitution of the year 8, promulgated in 1799, established the consulate and formally vested supreme power in the first consul, a position Napoleon held. This new framework centralized authority, creating a system where his executive decisions were paramount. To legitimize this radical shift from revolutionary ideals, a national plebiscite was organized. While modern analysis suggests the voting process was heavily managed, the official results showed an overwhelming approval of over 3 million votes in favor, providing a veneer of popular consent for his new government. Napoleon understood that effective rule required capable administration. He actively appointed talented individuals to key ministries and bureaucratic posts, prioritizing merit and competence over aristocratic birth or revolutionary purity. This approach brought stability and efficiency, as skilled administrators implemented his policies across France. A significant symbolic break with the revolutionary past was his move into the Tuileries Palace in early 1800. By occupying this former royal residence, he visually connected his regime to the traditional monarchy, signaling an end to the era of revolutionary upheaval and the dawn of a new, orderly, and powerful French state under his sole command. But this consolidation of domestic power would soon be tested on foreign battlefields as a familiar theater of war called once more. In the spring of 1800, Napoleon Bonaparte executed a maneuver that stunned Europe. His second Italian campaign began with a breathtaking gamble. To surprise the Austrian armies, he chose the most improbable route. He would lead his 40,000-strong reserve army across the treacherous Great St. Bernard Pass in the Alps. This was a path considered nearly impassable for a major military force, especially in May with lingering snow. The crossing was an immense logistical feat. Soldiers dragged artillery pieces by disassembling them and packing the components on sleds and mules. They navigated narrow, icy paths with sheer drops. The descent into Italy was equally perilous. This surprise strategy allowed Napoleon to appear in the Austrian rear, completely bypassing their fortified positions. He swiftly secured victories, most notably at the Battle of Marengo. This daring achievement was immortalized in the grand painting Napoleon Crossing the Alps by Jacques Louis David. The artist created a powerful, heroic image. Research has shown the depiction is highly idealized. Napoleon actually crossed on a mule, not a rearing horse. Yet the painting successfully cemented the legend of a bold leader shaping his own destiny against impossible odds. While the legend of Napoleon's bold leadership was being forged, the reality on the ground was about to face its ultimate test. The Battle of Marengo on the 14th of June, 1800, began as a near catastrophe for the French army. Austrian forces under General Michael von Melas launched a powerful surprise assault at dawn, achieving a significant breakthrough. French lines buckled under the pressure, and a general retreat was ordered. By early afternoon, the situation appeared desperate, with Napoleon's command on the verge of a total collapse that could have ended his political career. The tide turned dramatically with the timely arrival of General Louis Desaix and his fresh division of around 5,000 men. Upon assessing the situation, Desaix famously remarked, "This battle is completely lost, but there is time to win another." He immediately organized a fierce counterattack, stabilizing the French left flank. The assault was supported by a concentrated artillery barrage that shattered the advancing Austrian columns, throwing them into disarray and triggering a panicked retreat. This dramatic reversal secured a decisive French victory. The outcome at Marengo instantly transformed a potential military disaster into a legendary triumph. Analysis has shown that this single day's events were pivotal, solidifying Napoleon's fragile political position in Paris. The victory was portrayed as a masterstroke of genius, extinguishing domestic opposition and cementing his authority as first consul, a crucial step on his path to becoming Emperor of the French. This newfound political stability paved the way for Napoleon to shift his focus from consolidating power at home to pursuing diplomatic arrangements abroad. The Peace of Amiens, signed in March 1802, marked a temporary cessation of hostilities between France and Britain. This treaty concluded the War of the Second Coalition, creating a fragile peace across Europe. For the first time in nearly a decade, the continent experienced a period without major conflict. This brief interlude allowed for a normalization of international relations and travel. Napoleon Bonaparte utilized this peaceful period to focus extensively on domestic reforms within France. He initiated the creation of the French Civil Code, later known as the Napoleonic Code, which would become a lasting legal legacy. Major public works and infrastructural projects were also commissioned during this time. Furthermore, he solidified his political control, being proclaimed consul for life in August 1802. These actions were aimed at stabilizing and modernizing the French state. However, this stability proved short-lived. British anxieties grew steadily as Napoleon expanded French influence on the continent. His economic policies and territorial adjustments were viewed in London as direct threats to the European balance of power. Historical analysis reveals that Britain perceived French dominance as a challenge to its own commercial and imperial interests. Consequently, by early 1803, the peace had unraveled and the two nations were once again at war. Yet even as war resumed, Napoleon was already orchestrating a political transformation far more radical than territorial conquest. In the spring of 1804, the French Senate made a monumental declaration. They formally proclaimed Napoleon Bonaparte as Emperor of the French. This was not a mere title change but a profound constitutional transformation. The old consulate was replaced by a hereditary empire, fundamentally altering the republic's structure. New imperial titles were created, elevating his family into a new nobility. A national plebiscite was swiftly organized to legitimize this new status. Historical analysis reveals the vote was overwhelmingly in favor. While exact figures are debated, studies suggest millions approved, creating a powerful aura of popular consent for the empire. This public endorsement was a crucial step in solidifying his authority beyond the Senate's decree. The new empire required its own symbols. Imperial heraldry prominently featured golden eagle standards, evoking the legions of Rome. Researchers note the bee motif was chosen as an emblem of industriousness and immortality, a deliberate link to ancient Frankish kings. These symbols were meticulously designed to project power, tradition, and legitimacy, visually cementing Napoleon's imperial identity across France and its growing dominions. Yet these carefully crafted symbols of permanence would soon be tested in a single, defining ceremony: the coronation of Napoleon Bonaparte at Notre Dame Cathedral on December 2nd. 1804 was a spectacle of unprecedented political theater. The ceremony was meticulously orchestrated to project an image of imperial grandeur and legitimacy. Napoleon, having already been proclaimed emperor, now sought to cement his authority through a public ritual. The event was held in the newly restored cathedral, a symbolic act linking the new French Empire to the nation's historical and religious foundations. A defining moment occurred when Napoleon took the imperial crown from the hands of Pope Pius VII and placed it upon his own head. This deliberate act was a powerful statement of his sovereignty. Historical analysis suggests this move was calculated to demonstrate that his power derived from the people and the state, not from the papacy. The Pope's presence was thus largely ceremonial, his role reduced to offering a blessing after the fact. This maneuver effectively subordinated religious authority to the new imperial regime. The event was immortalized in the monumental painting by Jacques Louis David, The Coronation of Napoleon. While not a perfectly accurate record, David's work brilliantly captures the political essence of the day. The artist made several strategic alterations, such as depicting Napoleon's mother in the scene though she was absent, to reinforce the dynasty's unity and strength. The painting serves as a lasting testament to how Napoleon used symbolism to forge his legacy, transforming a military leader into a crowned emperor before the eyes of Europe. Having solidified his imperial authority through these symbolic acts, Napoleon consequently turned his attention to securing his legacy for future generations. Following his imperial coronation, Napoleon Bonaparte focused on establishing a lasting dynasty. He created a new imperial nobility in 1806, awarding titles like Prince, Duke, and Count to his most loyal military commanders and statesmen. This system was designed to reward service and secure the allegiance of the elite to his new regime. Simultaneously, he placed his family members on thrones across Europe. His brothers Joseph, Louis, and Jerome became kings of Naples, Holland, and Westphalia respectively, while his sisters and brother-in-law also received significant territories to govern. However, these appointments were not without problems. Research has shown that several siblings proved to be independent or incompetent rulers, creating administrative headaches for Napoleon. A more pressing personal concern was the lack of a direct heir. His wife, Josephine, had not borne him any children, and this became a source of growing anxiety. The absence of a successor threatened the entire foundation of his hereditary empire. This issue inevitably began to strain their marriage. Historical analysis reveals that tensions grew as Napoleon became increasingly preoccupied with securing his lineage, a concern that would ultimately lead him to consider a drastic political and personal decision. This dynastic pressure would soon compel him to make a fateful choice, one that would paradoxically free his strategic focus to return to the military innovations that had built his power in the first place. Napoleon Bonaparte fundamentally transformed artillery from a supporting arm into a decisive battlefield force. His reforms began with a complete overhaul of its organization. He integrated artillery more deeply into the structure of the Grand Army, creating highly mobile, independent divisions. These units could be rapidly deployed to critical sectors, shifting the tide of battle with concentrated firepower. This mobility gave French commanders a significant tactical advantage. A key element was the standardization of equipment. Napoleon drastically reduced the number of cannon types in service. He focused primarily on the versatile 12-pounder and the lighter 6-pounder field guns. This simplification extended to ammunition with the introduction of standardized shot and canister rounds. logistics became more efficient, ensuring a reliable supply of shells to the front lines. This systematic approach allowed for faster production and more predictable performance in combat. His tactical innovations were equally profound. He pioneered the massing of dozens of guns into a grand battery. This concentration could unleash a devastating barrage to soften enemy formations before a decisive infantry assault. The effectiveness of this system was demonstrated in numerous victories. Napoleon's belief in artillery's supremacy was captured in his famous assertion, often quoted as, "God is on the side of the best artillery." This philosophy, combined with his organizational genius, cemented his artillery as the cornerstone of his military successes for over a decade. While Napoleon's artillery innovations reshaped battlefield tactics, his organizational reforms would transform military structures on an even grander scale. Napoleon Bonaparte fundamentally reorganized the French military by introducing the corps system in the early 1800s. This structure replaced the traditional division-based army. Each corps functioned as a miniature, self-sufficient army with its own infantry, cavalry, and artillery. Commanded by a marshal, these formations could operate independently across a wide front. This strategic dispersal prevented the enemy from easily locating the main French force. When the moment for battle arrived, the corps could rapidly concentrate at a predetermined point. This mobility often allowed Napoleon to achieve local superiority against a fragmented opponent, a key element in his early victories. Alongside tactical innovation, Napoleon overhauled the army's logistical and command structures. He established a more efficient supply system, though it still relied heavily on local resources, a method known as foraging. A dedicated general staff was developed to coordinate complex movements and manage intelligence. This professionalization ensured that grand strategic plans could be executed effectively across vast distances. Historical analysis shows these reforms reduced the army's reliance on fixed supply depots, increasing its operational range and speed. Understanding that morale was as crucial as organization, Napoleon also focused on the human element. In 1802, he created the Legion of Honor. This institution recognized military and civilian merit regardless of social origin. Bestowing this award fostered immense loyalty and a new sense of honor within the ranks. Researchers argue this system of rewards was instrumental in maintaining the high esprit de corps that characterized the Grande Armée, binding soldiers directly to their emperor. This carefully cultivated loyalty would soon be tested on a single, decisive day in December. The Battle of Austerlitz, fought on December 2, 1805, stands as Napoleon Bonaparte's tactical masterpiece. Facing the combined forces of Austria and Russia, he executed a brilliant deception. His army feigned weakness, deliberately abandoning the strategic Pratzen Heights. This calculated move convinced the enemy commanders to launch a major assault on his seemingly vulnerable right flank. They took the bait, believing a decisive victory was within their grasp. Then came the legendary Sun of Austerlitz. As the late autumn morning unfolded, a thick fog blanketed the battlefield. At the precise moment Napoleon's main forces were poised to strike, the sun dramatically broke through the mist. This natural phenomenon not only illuminated the enemy's overextended lines, but also served as a powerful morale booster for the French troops. Historians note the timing was so perfect that many soldiers saw it as a divine omen. With the terrain and conditions now in his favor, Napoleon initiated his true plan. He launched a massive counterattack into the center of the Allied line, which had been weakened by their own offensive. His troops retook the Pratzen Heights, effectively splitting the enemy army in two. The coordination of this maneuver, striking at the perfect moment of enemy vulnerability, demonstrated an unparalleled understanding of timing and terrain. The Allied forces were thrown into chaos and suffered a catastrophic defeat, leading to the dissolution of the Third Coalition. Yet even as his military dominance seemed absolute, Napoleon was already preparing to open a new, more subtle front in his war for European supremacy. Napoleon Bonaparte implemented his continental system through two key decrees. The Berlin Decree of 1806 and the Milan Decree of 1807 aimed to create a large-scale European trade blockade against Great Britain. This strategy was a form of economic warfare designed to cripple the British economy by shutting it out of continental markets. The ultimate goal was to bankrupt the nation and force its surrender without a major land invasion. The system formally prohibited all of France's allies and conquered territories from trading with the British. Napoleon believed that by denying Britain its commercial outlets, he could trigger widespread unemployment and social unrest. However, enforcing this blockade across the vast and diverse territories of the French Empire proved immensely difficult. Widespread smuggling became rampant, with many merchants and even officials participating in illicit trade. Britain also adeptly countered with its own naval blockade and by developing new markets in the Americas. Research has shown that the continental system ultimately caused significant economic damage across Europe. Major port cities like Amsterdam and Hamburg experienced severe commercial decline as their maritime trade withered. Simultaneously, some continental manufacturing centers initially benefited from reduced British competition. Yet, the lack of raw materials and colonial goods created new industrial challenges. The economic hardship inflicted on European populations contributed to growing resentment against French hegemony, undermining Napoleon's strategic objectives. But where would Napoleon turn next to consolidate his control and address the rising discontent? In 1808, Napoleon's armies swept into Spain, a move that initially appeared to secure his continental dominance. He forced the Spanish king to abdicate and placed his own brother, Joseph, on the throne. This act of political usurpation, however, ignited a firestorm of popular resistance that French planners had gravely underestimated. The subsequent invasion of Portugal further stretched French logistical lines, embedding their forces deep within hostile territory. The conflict quickly devolved into a brutal guerrilla war. Spanish and Portuguese irregulars, known as guerrilleros, mastered hit-and-run tactics. They ambushed French supply convoys, severed communication lines, and then vanished into the rugged countryside. These constant, unpredictable attacks frustrated the large, conventional French formations, for whom finding a decisive battle was impossible. One French general lamented the invisible enemy, writing that the army was fighting a phantom. In response, the French High Command authorized severe counter-insurgency measures. They executed captured partisans and destroyed villages suspected of supporting the resistance. This systematic brutality, however, only served to fuel greater hatred and recruit more fighters to the cause. The guerrillas responded in kind, with their own acts of savagery against French soldiers. This cycle of violence locked both sides in a grim stalemate. The Peninsular War became a relentless drain on the French Empire. For over 5 years, it tied down 300,000 veteran troops in a costly occupation. The financial burden was immense, and the constant need for reinforcements weakened Napoleon's position elsewhere in Europe. Historians now view this Spanish ulcer as a critical factor in draining French manpower and morale, a fatal quagmire from which the empire would never fully recover. Yet even as his military fortunes waned, Napoleon was simultaneously crafting a bold dynastic solution to his political isolation. Following his divorce from Josephine de Beauharnais in January 1810, Napoleon Bonaparte sought a union that would solidify his dynasty and secure a strategic peace in Europe. His choice fell upon Archduchess Marie-Louise of Austria, daughter of Emperor Francis I. This marriage, formalized in April 1810, was a calculated political maneuver. By allying with the ancient House of Habsburg, Napoleon aimed to legitimize his own empire and neutralize a persistent continental adversary. The alliance yielded its first major success with the birth of a son, Napoleon Francis Joseph Charles, in March 1811. The child was immediately given the title King of Rome, a clear designation as the imperial heir. This event fulfilled Napoleon's most urgent dynastic ambition, providing the French Empire with a clear line of succession that it had previously lacked. The arrival of an heir temporarily stabilized the volatile relationship between France and Austria. For a few years, this Austrian marriage alliance created a fragile peace. It removed Austria as an immediate military threat, allowing Napoleon to focus on other fronts. However, historians note this stability was ultimately transient. The fundamental conflicts of interest and the rise of other European coalitions meant the respite was short-lived. The alliance, while a masterstroke of realpolitik, could not permanently reconcile Habsburg interests with those of the French Empire. Yet this fleeting diplomatic stability would soon be shattered by the return of overwhelming military ambition. Our journey into the life of Napoleon Bonaparte comes to an end. From his birth and education in France, we traced his early military commission through revolutionary turmoil. His Toulon breakthrough moment and command of the army led to lightning victories, including the legend of Lodi Bridge. Napoleon proved a political master, orchestrating a strategic Egyptian gambit despite a naval disaster, and planning a coup d'état before consolidating authority. The Second Italian Campaign, marked by the Battle of Marengo turning point, preceded the Peace of Amiens and his proclamation of empire. His Notre Dame coronation solidified his rise, and he began creating a dynasty, revolutionizing artillery and organizing the Grand Army for masterpieces like Austerlitz. We examined his economic warfare strategy, the Peninsular War quagmire, and his Austrian marriage alliance, before he gathered the Grand Army again. The crossing of the Niemen River led to the Borodino bloodbath and the Moscow occupation disaster, followed by the horror of the retreat. His army of ghosts returned, facing German campaign defeats and an Allied invasion of France. The 100 Days' return saw a lengthy victory and strategic mistakes culminating in the Waterloo battle narrative. His final abdication led to St. Helena, and his death and controversial autopsy sparked enduring historical interpretations. His political and legal reforms, military legacy, and mythology continue to be studied. Subscribe to our channel to not miss new episodes. See you soon.